day, familia. This is Raul Collazo, your host of the Found Translation Talk Show, your home for Latino politics. Thank you so much for joining us. You can follow Found Translation anywhere online, anywhere you can download a podcast, our YouTube channel, as well as follow us on social media at FIT_talk show. This is indeed your home for Latino politics. And speaking about Latino politics, you can't talk Latino politics without having my fearless co-host on, communications expert, political analyst, Enrique Chaurand. Enrique, welcome back to Found in Translation, brother.
You know, it's always a pleasure to be with you, Rafael. Thanks again. We've got a great show today. As you know, Found in Translation is where it's at. As you said, your home for Latino politics. We're excited to be back for another week of analysis of all things politics impacting our country and the Latino community. But before we dive in, I just need to give our viewers that wonderful disclaimer again. The views expressed on the Found in Translation podcast by its hosts and guests are their own and do not reflect the view of any affiliated organizations. So now that we got that out of the way, Rafael, looking forward to the podcast today because we have a couple of great guests, don't we?
We have a couple of great guests, including our first heavy hitter, one of the top Latina political organizers, and really what my go-to on all things Arizona. We're going to introduce her in a second. Want to shout out your t-shirt there, Enrique. That's a fine item you have there. Just in case everyone wasn't clear where this guy was hecho. Very nice, brother. Very, very nice. And I know I want to shout out, people saw the image in the beginning of the show, and we'll talk about it later, the upcoming UnidosUS Conference. You're going to be heading to San Antonio. So for folks that are going to be in San Antonio or are already there anyway, definitely catch Enrique Chaurand at the upcoming UnidosUS Conference. Going to be a great activity, and we're going to talk more about that. But I want to bring on a colleague, a friend, and we really wanted to take a deep dive today and get the perspective of what's going on in really what is has been ground zero for Latino politics for a generation now. The great state of Arizona, currently the Arizona director for the UnidosUS Action Fund, and the expert on Arizona, our dear friend Liz Salazar. Good day, Liz. How are you?
Hi, good morning from Arizona. Doing well. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you, Rafael.
Well, it's very well deserved. And, there's always, I love to be the instigator for these debates. This happens also with soccer, between my Mexicanos and my South Americans. I like to be the one to tweak the debate. And one of the debates that I love to fester is the debate about what's really the valley in the Latino community, because, of course, we have the Rio Grande in South Texas, our California friends, Central Valley, the San Fernando Valley. There's all these debates, but everyone really knows it's all about the Valley of the Sun, the great state of Arizona, my friend. We all know that. Thank you so much, Liz, for joining us. Enrique is we're going to have later on the show another great activist, Luis Avila, is going to join us to really dive deeper into understanding this crazy political landscape. What do we do now to organize the Latino community moving forward? But Liz is going to begin the conversation with us in a second with Enrique, really kind of guiding us on what's going on and really giving us a sense of the political landscape. There's some very interesting, important elections coming up with some very interesting characters. But Liz, I just want to start with this and really kind of get your, on a personal level, my friend. Everything going on in Arizona, everything going on in our politics, and then SCOTUS punches us in the gut these last few weeks. And then I don't have to tell you everything going on July 4th and all these tragedies upon tragedies. So just on your perspective, Liz is one of our top political organizers in Arizona. And just as a young mother and a young leader in Arizona, just how are you feeling July 7th about where we're at here, and just get your initial thoughts on how we begin this conversation?
Yeah, I think it would be disingenuous for me to say anything other than despondent. I think particularly as a young mother. So I have a 1-year-old daughter, and obviously I'm really active in politics, and I keep up with news, both local and national. And it makes you think twice about, what have I brought another person into? But I also know that I brought another life into this world because I'm hopeful. So there's days that I'm very despondent about what's going on. And sometimes I wonder, is there a way through? Are we going to be able to make change? How do we win this battle? Because that's what it feels like, a battle for life. But I'm very hopeful that there's a lot of passionate, energetic people here in Arizona and across the nation who want to see change, want to see positive change. So that's how I'm feeling.
Well, Liz, Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Last week we had on Yvonne Gutierrez, who talked about her time in working for Planned Parenthood in Texas, and now she's with Latino Victory. And we got into the discussion, but I think your perspective is unique and appreciated. I've had the opportunity to work with Liz, and I think she's phenomenal and really knows what's going on there in Arizona. So let's get right into it. I mean, big Senate race coming up, right? Mark Kelly is up for re-election. Lots of money being poured into that race. Lots of back and forth. The prognosticators feel like maybe Kelly is going to squeak this one out or win this one. But again, would love to get your analysis of that race and how are things on the ground? What's it looking like?
Yeah, I think for the only person in Arizona that might be breathing a little bit lighter when it comes to their race is Mark Kelly. Poll after poll puts him ahead. For voters, I think for a number of reasons. Arizona has been sort of in this purple, let's call it a purple state status for a while. And although some people say we turned blue last election, it was not true. If you look at down ballot votes, races, it went even further to the right. That's a whole other discussion, and he squeaked out his vote too, with just a couple point margin there. But, polls are putting him pretty far ahead, especially with Latino voters, despite the fact that they're becoming disillusioned with the Progressive Party. He's going to have definitely an easier time than his opponents. I think his main opponents right now are current Attorney General Mark Brnovich and Blake Masters, who's a tech executive. I think Mark Brnovich probably sucks most of the air out of the room because he's a current elected leader, and he's in the news a lot for his interpretation of law and being involved with all sorts of high-profile lawsuits. So I think, the battle will become sort of this very, very Trumpy sort of candidate, which is Brnovich, even though he and Trump have a contentious relationship. And that seemed to be the case with a lot of high profile Republicans here in Arizona, including our government with the former president. And then Mark Kelly, who's sort of a middle of the road progressive, but has been able to keep his head down and get some work done and definitely not ruffle feathers like his seatmate, Senator Sinema. So, that's the Senate race, and that's probably the least salacious of the races. I think it's probably going to be the least wild, although it probably will be wild too. But when you look at the gubernatorial race, that's where things become a little bit of a circus, to be honest.
No, it's we're going to get to the circus in a second, but I want to ask you, Liz, I think that the Senate race really speaks to sort of Arizona being a petri dish of what's happening nationally. So, nationally, Democrats are going to be in tough shape. Anytime inflation is just the political killer of them all. And as well as some of these other issues that people are concerned about, and just sort of a general sense of a downer. The country's just not feeling great about itself for a lot of reasons.
Yep.
But when we turn to Arizona, we see a Republican Party that should be taking full advantage potentially of this sentiment in the country, and is shooting themselves in the foot with these nuts that they're running for office. And so on the flip side, Kelly is, not exactly, like super charismatic, but you can certainly argue he's focused on the issues that Latinos are care about. Yeah. So can you speak a little bit about some of the issues you see on the ground that Latinos are really concerned about, and potentially how Kelly is helping make that connection?
Yeah, it's interesting to see how candidates are going to pivot their talking points in a sort of post-Roe decision world, because there's polling before that and there's polling after that. And when it comes to Latinos, as I think it comes to many Arizonans and people across the nation, the economy is far and away the number one thing on their minds. They need to put food on their tables. They need to put gas in their cars. They need to pay rent, or at least find a place to live, which in Arizona has become a huge struggle as house prices are overvaluated by 45% in Phoenix. And there's just not enough places for people to live that are affordable. And so those sort of bread and butter issues are going to be what win over the independent and undecided voters. And I think that's where Kelly appeals to a lot of people. He's not extreme in his views in any sort of way, whether it's progressive or conservative, and comes across as very interested in just getting work done and working across the aisle and just focusing on real issues rather than sort of polarizing issues. And it's notable that he stays out of polarizing issues. He doesn't want to talk about some of the things that just rile people up. He doesn't want to speak ill of his seatmate. He doesn't want to get too involved in things that are sort of, flashes in the pan. He wants to focus on those bread and butter issues. And I think that will help him, especially with Latinos. Like I said, number one issue is going to be the economy. I think after Uvalde, after post-Roe, other issues are polling as strong issues with Latinos, including the right to an abortion. And also, what are we going to do about guns, gun control, which those things probably weren't on the radar as much before the ruling and before Uvalde. It's a tragedy that has really underpinned issues with law enforcement and issues with gun control, issues with safety in our schools. So not a whole lot of polling has come out since, although the one poll that I've seen puts gun issues and abortion rights issues up among the top things that Latinos are caring about. So it'll be interesting to see how the senator comes to talk about those things, and if they continue to be a salient issue as the election cycle moves on. And you know how things go fast and wild things are happening every day.
Two pieces as it relates to, and Enrique has a question about the governor's race in a second, but two things I would encourage people to continue to monitor as it relates to the Senate race, and specifically Mark Kelly's candidacy and political viability. One is that there are continued conversations. I was actually reading this morning that around some very skinny, very skinny Build Back Better bill that would include something in budget reconciliation that Manchin could agree to as it relates to one of the pillars being as it relates to controlling prescription drug costs, which is a big issue in Arizona, a bigger issue that people realize in the Latino community, and has been something that Kelly has been focused on in his tenure in the Senate. So how his leadership evolves in that area and is visible over the next few months, I think will be interesting. And of course, Mark Kelly is the husband of former Congresswoman and, really a symbol of this gun safety conversation, Gabrielle Gifford. So his role is obvious as it relates to that conversation. So those are two pieces I would encourage people to continue to monitor as it relates to Kelly. But I know Enrique has a question about the governor's race.
Yeah, thank you, Rafael, and I appreciate that. Liz, you alluded to earlier in your comments about the circus that is the gubernatorial race in Arizona. I think we're going to show a clip here in a little bit on the debate that they had, but my goodness, lots going on, have a lot of different personalities. It seems like everybody's trying to be more Trumpier than the other one. I don't even know if that's a word, but they're trying to out-Trump each other. There's a couple of leading candidates, both female. One I remember is Robin Lake, I believe is her name.
Carrie Lake.
Carrie Lake. I remember Carrie Lake when I was going to school at Arizona State because she was a longtime broadcaster there, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, but give us a sense of what's going on there. I mean, that's also going to be a really critical race as well. You talked about, the state legislature getting more conservative, more Republicans, right? So the down ballot races out during the presidential, made the legislature more conservative. Talk about what's at stake for the governor's race and kind of your analysis and where things stand. And again, lastly, what impact the Latino vote may have, for either side here on this race.
Yeah, unfortunately, Arizona is in the news yet again for something that makes people, chuckle and say, "Oh, Arizona," and I have a feeling we're going to see that in an upcoming clip. But, we'll start with just the GOP primary situation. So we have two front runners, Carrie Lake, a former Fox News journalist, and she had been in people's homes for years and years and years, and we knew her as sort of just a regular old journalist and nothing too intense. And something seems to have changed intensely in the last few years. And then her main opponent, I would say, is Karen Taylor Robson, who is a developer and a businesswoman. And I would say that they are kind of two sides of the same coin, although Carrie Lake very much is considered to be sort of, if you want to put it in these terms, the Trumpier option, right? And the crux of her whole campaign is that the elections were stolen, and sort of riding that train about, ballots being stolen and this, that, and the other, and sort of just really, really, banging hard on that. And then Karen Taylor Robeson is sort of more of the traditional conservative, but really they both have a lot of the same policy platforms. I would say it's a matter of like, what flavor do you want? And just recently, I believe it was just today, that Governor Ducey endorsed Karen Taylor Robeson. The other two candidates that were on the stage are not they're not polling more than 1%, if that, and it's really between the two women here, and it's a little bit concerning about how extreme the rhetoric is on the GOP side, and how it's become much more of a how close to Trump can you get. And then when you flip over and look at the Democratic side, it's disappointing in a different way. We have two main candidates, which are Katie Hobbs, our current Secretary of State, and a former Senate leader in the Arizona State Legislature, and Marco Lopez, who was a very, very young mayor in Nogales, Arizona, worked for Customs and Border Protections under Janet Napolitano, and has been in the political scene for a little bit here. And we haven't seen them debate yet. So far, we've just seen Marco Lopez on PBS sort of having an interview because Katie Hobbs said she was too busy to come to the debate. So it's disappointing to not see these two have a debate. And it's disappointing also, I think, to a lot of progressives that we don't have a larger pool of candidates to pick from.
No, and before we show this clip, to give people a flavor of what's going on in the Republican gubernatorial primary, and we're talking to Liz Salazar here on Found in Translation about sort of the Arizona landscape. Been ground zero for Latino politics for a generation now. That on the Democratic side, I think there was a lot of hope that Katie Hobbs, who was sort of a symbol of good democracy, being the candidate, and she just for lots of reasons, Liz, which knows better than we do, just hasn't. I think it's safe to say it's been a disappointing run so far. Somewhat analogous to what's happening with Nikki Fried out in Florida. But I want to show this clip, Liz, because I know people think, wow, some of these Republicans are really out there, but I think this clip really typifies the challenges we have with a party that really is, for all the legitimate critiques you could make of the Democratic Party, we really have a party here that's really in crisis on the Republican side. So let's show this clip and get Liz's reaction to some people that are trying to be her governor.
Business down, but you know what? I didn't listen. I kept it open. You didn't have to listen, people. You didn't have to listen.
I'd actually like to ask everybody on this stage if they would agree we had a corrupt, stolen election. Raise your hand. Never happened.
HB 2389.
Hold on. Let her finish, please, Scott.
Okay. God, they talk over me, and I'm Italian. That shouldn't happen. You know what?
I'm Irish.
Okay. You know what? Why not get high-tech people that are going to be on the machines that are Republicans? A Democrat, Republican, get supervisors, equal amount.
That happens. That we have parties looking over
that's
election
right.
results.
They're doing it now.
No,
they're actually
always
telling
done
people
it.
that 200,000 minimum ballots were trafficked by mules.
No,
an honest election.
May I finish? Mamma mia.
I feel like I'm on an SNL skit here. Are we going to take control of?
Mamma mia, indeed, Liz. Talk to me, Liz. The floor is yours, Liz. These are your people.
I mean, it's embarrassing, and this is upsetting because as a native Arizonan, somebody who was raised and grew up here my whole life, you see Arizona in the headlines for stuff like this, and it's not reflective of the place that I grew up, the place that I know, the people that I know. But the rhetoric has become so polarizing, so extreme, and so wild. on the conservative side, that this is who we end up with. These people who are possibly going to run the state of Arizona. And it's really, I mean, honestly, I'm a little bit scared about what could happen when you see people like this who are so clearly like manipulating voters with fear about COVID, fear about a stolen election, and
Fear
not
about
talking about
fear about
fear
Latinos.
about Latinos, right? Xenophobia, and not focusing on things that affect people's everyday lives. Their kids need a quality school to go to. They need to be able to put food on their table. They need a place for their family to live. They need access to healthcare. These are the things that matter in people's lives. And they work up a lot of voters with these wild issues and things that are not important to our everyday lives in Arizona, not important to making sure that this is a great state to live and to thrive in.
And we're talking to Liz Salazar from UnidosUS Action Fund, talking about the great state of Arizona and how it's really been the ground zero for Latino politics for a generation. We're going to be joined by Luis Avila shortly to continue the conversation with Liz Salazar. All right, so what do we do now? How do we organize ourselves in this political climate to mobilize Latino voters in Arizona and throughout the country? We're going to take a quick break, Liz, and then we're going to come back and talk more about the great state of Arizona here on Found in Translation.
I just so often run across so many of the women, my hermanas who are out listening and watching, who are basically the backbone of our movement, whether you're in the labor movement or faith-based organizing, or if you're leading in a public school, you are leading into your vision. You are living into the fullest sense of who you are, and you are loving past all the negatives. And right now we have a lot of negatives. We've got COVID-19. We've got the racial reckoning that this country has been, long for many, many years avoiding. And our people and our children and our families are under threat. And so we need 100% of my hermanas and my sisters, Black and brown women from all communities, to thrive, to bring 100% of your creativity into this fight.
Chef Greg, I got a few questions for you, okay? I've been dying to ask a Puerto Rican chef que wears a Puerto Rican hat, got cuatros in the background, got a flag. Olvídate, you represent, okay. Okay, here we go, ready? Pastelillo de guayaba, ¿con queso o sin queso?
Oh, sin queso.
Thank you. Oh my God, where the church
sin queso.
When they put queso in that, yo me pongo tan malo. Why are you putting queso, man? I said guayaba. I don't need queso. You know what? Use that space to put more guayaba. Okay.
That's it.
Pastele. ¿Con ketchup o sin ketchup?
Con ketchup.
This is my man, yo.
We love you. We know.
I'm booking you.
There you go, you know.
I'll tell you what, let me get Enrique back on here. Much respect to Eli Castro, fantastic comedian. He's been touring. He actually was he was in DC recently, at the Lincoln Center Theater. And he's got a show in New Jersey coming up. Follow Eli Castro. And of course, Chef Greg with Sabor with Love is one of the top Puerto Rican chefs online. He makes some incredible dishes. And that is, of all the content I've created, that is my favorite clip of all times, because it's crystallizes so much. It was a lot of fun.
I can see why. Why not? Talking about food.
And it's just, two of the greats, and I don't want to minimize some of the ladies that were on that clip. Christina Vega is one of our contributors from Love Shouldn't Hurt Me, and Mendez, actress and broadcaster, and Chef Greg's wife, Nicole, who's really the brains behind the operation. But Ellie and Greg and that group, they really epitomize why I do this work on these platforms to elevate some of the great voices in our community. I will say this, though, Chef Greg is wrong. You do not put ketchup on pasteles. That is one of the great debates, that we have in the Puerto Rican community. But I want to bring Liz back on because we're going to continue this conversation about Arizona. We have another guest that's on his way. But Liz, so let's get Liz Salazar here. Liz Salazar in Arizona. So Liz, this is where we're at right now. So we have a Senate race that's going to control the makeup of the Senate. doesn't get much more important than that. Thinking about the Supreme Court, right, as well as other issues. We have a governor's race that could determine all kind of issues as it relates to our civil rights and education issues, some of the priorities you work on at the state level. But this is a real challenging environment to organize and excite people about voting. So when you think about the conversation around what do we do now as it relates to the Latino electorate in Arizona, where do we start? Talk to us. How do we begin to think about how we mobilize our people for these elections in the fall?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting time for Latino voters because we had such a good showing in the last election, and there was a lot of money poured into Arizona, a lot of workers poured into Arizona, even during the height of the pandemic, to get out the vote, get people registered to vote, canvassing, etc. And we're not seeing that same money come in this time. And I think people underestimate how volatile the electorate is here right now. It could really tip either way, and it's going to depend on mobilizing Latino voters and persuading independents one way or the other. It's always a matter of who are independents going to vote for it, and will they come out to vote? Because when it comes to ideologies, Democrats and Republicans are basically head to head in Arizona. You have to convince those middle of the road people. And I think that includes a lot of Latino voters who are not necessarily persuaded by Democrats and don't look at their track record and say, hey, they're doing a lot for me. And I think they're completely justified in saying that. Like, my life is harder now than it was before. There are things like DACA and other policies that are being held up by our representatives. And when you look at somebody like Kirsten Sinema, who feels like she's actively blocking progress on some of these things, you start to wonder, we got out the vote for her. We banged on doors for her. We shouted her name from the rooftops, and look where it got us. So a lot of people are feeling very disillusioned about whether or not their vote even matters. So there's a lot of work to be done with Latino voters and a lot of, I think, younger voters and sort of independent voters about the power of their vote, staying in the game, and making sure that they, do their research and make sure that their voice is heard. And that's a hard thing to do. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. And I think we want to mobilize Latino voters. Candidates are going to have real plans for things that are going to affect their everyday lives, make their lives easier and safer, make their kids safer and better educated. And year after year, it's the same song and dance. And no matter who's in power, it feels like we're struggling, and we're struggling hard. So both sides of the aisles have a lot of work to do. I think a lot of Latino voters don't quite understand the sheer power of numbers that we have in the state, and that we will continue to have as time goes on. And this is a statistic that I throw around all the time, which is half of the kids in the K-12 system are Latino. That's half, and they're moving along, and they're going to become a voting age soon. And they also need to be really engaged and civic-minded voters, right? And we're hoping that they will have passion to do so, and they won't end up in the many, many voters who sit on the sidelines during the primaries, especially, but also, just during regular voting days. And it's going to take a lot of convincing for these voters to get the energy up to vote, and think that something that their vote even matters, that something will happen if they vote for a certain candidate. And the candidates have a lot of work to do to win that trust.
Enrique is going to introduce our other very special guest in a second, but I want to add, and I want people to understand this, watching this, or activists around the country, and this is a framing that I think our guests would agree is something we have to highlight in these conversations from a Latino civil rights perspective. Arizona, Nevada, some of these states in the Southwest that are, kind of in reality purplish states, but tend to be controlled by Republicans because of traditional voting patterns. There's some of the on the bottom rung of education funding for K through 12 students. It's not a coincidence that these states that are like Arizona, that are run by older white Republicans, are not funding the future of the state, which, by the way, is Latino. So as you look at issues like education, like healthcare access, you really have to think about it from a civil rights lens around why are these issues so discarded in our politics when in terms of investing in the future of the state, because we're the future of the state to a large degree. So Enrique, I know our very special guest is one of the leaders in advocating from that perspective, and especially in the field of education. I know you want to introduce him right now.
Absolutely. We are now going to be joined by our good friend, Luis Avila, who is the founder and CEO of Icónico, but he has a very long history of being a community activist and organizer. He's been on the forefront of some of the most critical issues that have been impacting Latinos in Arizona, most notably his advocacy and work around the DREAM Act and the fight against Senate Bill 1070 in Arizona, which essentially challenged the discrimination practices of former Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio, for those of us who are old enough to remember what he was all about. That was awful. But he's also the former vice chair for UnidosUS, and I had the opportunity to work with him when I was there, and he currently sits on the board of the New Teacher Project. So he's on the speed dial for many national civic engagement organizations around the country.
Big player, this brother, man.
Absolutely. And
Big
so
player.
We're really glad to have him on the show with us today. So Luis, thank you so much for joining Found in Translation.
Yeah, thank you, Enrique, Rafael, and Liz. And good to see you too. And what a generous introduction. Thank you so much, Enrique.
Very well deserved, brother.
That's
So
right. Muy
Enrique,
merecido.
you know it. So Luis, we wanted to have you on today because we're doing, as part of our ongoing show, really taking some deep dives and giving the Latino leaders around the country analysis of what's going on in the states. And so we started with Arizona, very well deserved. Liz, as you know, is our Arizona State Director. We just gave the first segment show did an excellent job sort of giving us the landscape in terms of the Senate race, the governor's race. We saw a wacky clip of that Republican primary you got going on. So now we really wanted to pick you and Liz's brain about, all right, so what do we do now? So we're thinking about sort of the Latino electorate in Arizona specifically going into this year in a very challenging political environment. Where do we begin and how do we mobilize our Latino community that's feeling very distraught about a lot of things for a lot of reasons right now in 2022?
Well, I think, Rafael, that one important thing to remember is that we are not a monolith as voters, right? We are very different people from different backgrounds. And even though Arizona, most of Latinos who live in Arizona are from Mexican descent, including myself, people who either move here or, have had a life here or who have been here for generations, our experiences have been different. And one of the things that I feel it's a really bad trap is treating the Latino population in Arizona as one. The way that I like to think about it is that we have a lot of rural Latinos in the state of Arizona. Nationally, I think that we usually equate rural with white voters. Here in Arizona, it's not the case. We have places like Yuma, for example, with 70% Latino in their place, but with a very low percentage of Latino registered voters, right? Now, this is the birthplace of Cesar Chavez, right? Maricopa County, it's a second population, I would say. It's a really critical one. Maricopa County, I would say there's like the urban core, Phoenix metro area, where there's a high population of Latinos, a lot of immigrant populations, a lot of first generation populations in the south, central and west side of the city of Phoenix. People who have, like Enrique said, been through the Arpaio story, the SB 1070 attacks, and who are highly politicized. I mean, these are folks who know how the system works, who have fought against the system, who have showed up to march. And I think that one mistake we made is that we haven't made the case of how these attacks continue to be now nationally consistent against our community. And then the third one is, the more suburban Latinos, who are a really large part of the population that I think Liz was talking about. Some of them persuadable voters who are just not convinced that voting is something that they should or want to do. Particularly men we're seeing in Arizona that are trending apathetic into voting, for very understandable reasons. But that it's important for us to think about that these populations are all different, listen and react to different messages, and that it's important for us to talk and listen to these folks year round, right? And not just wait for the last couple of months of election too.
So Liz talked about on the organizing side and talked about the lack of resources and actually investment that is coming into the state, right, to get Latinos mobilized to vote. And so you kind of touched upon apathy. So how are we going to get them to actually go and vote? It's one thing to inform them, educate them about the issues, have candidates reach out. You know, Rafael and I were talking in a previous episode how many Latinos haven't even had a candidate come and knock on their door, or someone from the campaign to actually come talk to them, right? So that's also lacking. But really, you know, Liz also touched on it. Latinos don't understand, right, the power that they have, Latino voters, right? The numbers, just sheer numbers. But how are we going to actually get them, motivate them to the polls, especially for this midterm, which there's a lot on the line. I mean, there's a lot on the line every year, but it seems like this particular midterm, there's a lot on the line, especially in Arizona, is going to play a big role in that.
And I think that the local organizations, led by what we call here the Me Arizona Coalition or the Activate 48 Coalition, these coalitions of organizations, mostly led by Latinos and people of color, are really betting on Latinos reacting and getting energized by issues down the ballot. So they're really focusing on the Secretary of State race. They're focusing on the county attorney race. They're focusing on the ballot initiatives, like including the democracy ballot initiative that would make automatic voter registration. What I think is going to happen, though, is that the bet is big, right, on kind of going after voters and telling them, talking about issues of democracy, issues of criminal justice. And I do think, though, it is important to understand that voters are struggling with issues on their economy, their personal economies, gas prices and accessibility to high-paying wages. And I feel that one of the things that we forget is that Latinos, while we are resilient and we make it work, right? The fact is that it's getting harder in our communities. I think it's getting harder to make it work. So one mirage that we could make is that what gets us in the political space excited will get voters excited, and I think that is wrong. We had to do it all, right? We had to talk about democracy and criminal justice. We had to talk about Senator Kelly. We had to talk about the governor's race. But we also have to talk about how issues that are directly impacting Latinos right now matter. So in issues of gas prices, for example, here in Arizona, it is important for us to know about the Corporation Commission and the role that it has in energy in the state. Access to water and things that people are concerned about that I don't think we talk a lot about in the state. So one proposal that I would make for us as Latinos in the state is that we try to diversify our messaging and messengers so that different people are talking to different audiences, which is going to be critical for us to get people out. The other thing is that, Enrique, the truth is that women are the future. They're the present and they're the future. And Latinas in particular are voting at a higher number. They're more excited about elections, and they're the most trusted messenger in our community. So we had to talk to Latinas. We had to invest in Latinas. We had to ensure that Latinas are the people who are leading the conversation so that we can actually get, the apathetic men out.
Well, and that's why we have Liz running Arizona, right? We have a wonderful Latina leading the work there on behalf of Unidos. So a question to both of you. If you could wave a magic wand and talk to, the parties, the apparatus, the political folks in Arizona, and you could say, look, these are the kinds of investments that need to be made, right, to attract Latino voters. This is the message that you need to be honing in on, right, and really talking about that are going to get people to come out and vote. So we'll start with Liz, ladies first. So Liz, if you could wave that magic wand, what would it be? What would it look like?
If I could wave a magic wand, it would be for the candidates to talk to the people. And like I've said many times, about things that affect their everyday lives. What will they do to help make sure that they have access to a livable wage? They have access to affordable housing. What's their plan for making sure that their kids have access to an excellent education in their neighborhood school, no matter where they live? These are things that matter to all voters, and they matter to Latino voters. And, those things that affect your family, right? Your livelihood. And focusing on these issues that are polarizing and meant to ruffle people's feathers are not doing anything to help us. I wish I could wave a magic wand and make them truly focus on solutions that make people's lives easier and make them happier and healthier.
Yeah, Luis, to piggyback on that, I mean, ask you the same question, but I don't know if either of you saw the future majority poll that came out. And so you saw these are the same kinds of issues that Latino voters in those three states where Arizona, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, right? These bread and butter issues, the economy, inflation, right? And one thing that has not resonated with Latino voters is this culture war, right? That the Republicans continue to propagandate and put out there, right? It's, the whole Trump MAGA kind of, line of messaging. So it seems in these three particular states, though, that is not working. So again, Luis, if you had that magic wand, what would you say? And then if you could comment on the messaging, right, that seems to be resonating with Latino voters as it related to the poll.
Yeah, I think, Enrique, one of the things that I would say is I would wave the magic wand to ensure that both resources and organizations were working to contact voters and talk to voters year round and build actual capacity, political capacity in the state. Because what's happening in the reality is that most of our organizations receive funding few months before elections to just have transactional conversations with voters, which, by then they've heard all of this disinformation and misinformation. The old days of talking to voters at the end are gone, right? Like our voters are listening to messages on Instagram, on WhatsApp, on different platforms on YouTube. And we had to make sure that we are talking to voters all year about their legislative, session, about the impact that we're having with the issues that they're having, actually putting stories out there. And I think, Enrique, if I wave the magic wand, I will make sure that the resources were coming like that, in more like a stream than just like a bucket of water.
Or the drip drip. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think that it's an important thing to call out, especially because most of our funding in Arizona, over 95, we're doing a report right now in our organization, Instituto, and we're finding that more than 95% of our dollars come from out of state, right? So if the interest of national people are federal policies, right, or national policies, then we're all going to be only reacting to Senate races or federal candidates. We had to change that. We had to make sure that we go and talk to the voters about the issues that they care the most. And on the messaging front, Enrique, I think that one of the things that the Republican Party has done really well is that it's really, really clear for them to make villains, right? To say that the government is not working. Therefore, why even support the people who are running there? And they are running their own, right? That's why the Republican Party is actually being taken over by these, fringe elements of the party. And to be honest, those fringes are getting people excited to come out. And what I wonder myself is, not what are the fringes on the Democratic side, but who are the people most impacted by social inequities that are being profiled, that are being put in platforms, that are talking about issues, that are running for office. And that is not a bunch of, political elites trying to get power. And I think that that's an important question, is for the future of Latino power. How are we going to invest in the leadership development? How are we going to invest in the positionality, in the political infrastructure that we need, in the sustainability of our own finances to be able to run our campaigns and run our own movements? Because if we continue to wait and we continue to just depend on, likely national dollars to come to the state, we're going to be in this situation forever.
Luis, thank you so much for joining the show. We need to have you back to really dive into a real deep dive on that organizing conversation, because, one of the challenges we're going to have in this cycle, and I've seen forever, and I know you have, and I know our panel would agree, is that so many of the issues our folks care about are really, really hyper local stuff, stuff that really is more analogous to issues that your local city council person or your sheriff or your fire commissioner, your mayor are really critically, or school board members are critically important to. And how do you equate that in terms of how do you mobilize people around those issues, which don't get enough attention, which aren't very sexy, to build power in our community, to then be in a better position? And y'all have done that very successfully. We would not have, the Democrats would not have flipped the state in 2020 without the work that was done reacting to Arpaio and the anti-immigrant sentiment of the early 2000s. So, these are generational challenges. And Luis, you're one of the best in the business. We really appreciate your time. And we look forward to have you back on Found Translation very soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of you. And I hope to see you all soon in person.
Absolutely. That was Luis
Thank you, Luis.
Avila. That was Luis Avila, one of our great activists. As we wrap up this episode, Enrique, I know we want to make sure people understand, first of all, that, these two amazing leaders are going to be somewhere this weekend. Y'all can catch them at a very important convening. But I know, speaking of great leaders, Enrique, we want to acknowledge one of the great Latino champions is being honored as we speak on the highest levels of our country.
Yes, thank you, Rafael. That's correct. We want to give a very special shout out to civil rights icon and leader, President Emeritus of UnidosUS, and the former ambassador to the Dominican Republic, Raul Yzaguirre, who today is receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom at the White House from President Biden. He actually is joining Gabby Giffords. She's also one of the recipients this year. Yeah. As I think we would all agree, this is more than deserving for a man who put
overdue, frankly.
Yes, long overdue.
Who
put Unidos, but at the time when he led it, was NCLR, the National Council of La Raza. He put us on the map. I had the occasion to meet him and speak with him a few times, and I would just say this really quickly. The first time I remember meeting him for the first time, he was actually visiting my hometown of Kansas City, and he was meeting with some affiliates. And my uncle led an affiliate for many years, the Guadalupe Center there, and he was with him, and he and Charles Kamasaki. We're eating enchiladas at my mom's restaurant. So that's the first time I remember ever meeting Raul Yzaguirre. He took the time to talk to me, and who knew later on I would have the opportunity to work with him just for a brief amount of time. But what a great man, and so very happy for him and his family.
A true icon, and someone that we need to, and thinking about future episodes and the work that we all do collectively with Unidos and as part of the Unidos family, we really need to make sure that more Latinos not only know his history and know the incredible legacy that he continues to provide us, but really the lessons learned from his leadership. Raul went through a lot of evolutions. Is sort of like a very, as a street activist, and very aggressive, very, really inspiring, and then sort of evolved and really understanding the importance of bipartisanship, policy, and really moving the needle from a legislative perspective, moving NCLR at the time to Washington, D.C. to really led to really becoming the national institution that it is, and with the influence that we have to this day. So much respect to Raul. What a wonderful man, and the award's really well deserving. Liz, you're going to be in San Antonio this weekend. So why don't you tell people about the conference and why everyone's got to stop by to see Enrique and Liz this weekend at the Unidos Conference?
Well, the conference is going to be a wonderful opportunity for us to get together after not having seen each other for years, and really get excited about what's ahead and how we can all work together to make sure that Latinos are flourishing in this country, and on the path to creating generational wealth, getting the access to the best education we can. And I'm excited to see all my colleagues and so many people that are there to learn and discuss and grow new ideas.
Everyone, if you're not already planning on going to the conference, if you're in San Antonio, you're in Houston, you're in the Valley, you're in Austin, you're driving distance or can travel to San Antonio this week, and I encourage everyone to check out the UnidosUS Conference. I unfortunately won't be there because of other commitments, but Enrique and Liz will be there. So you got the big stars anyway. As we wrap this up, the last shout out I want to give is I wanted to shout out Liz because she is just she does such amazing work for us in Arizona. We'll have you on other times, Liz, to really get in a deeper dive into some of the state work you're doing and educational advocacy and many other issues. But you really are representative. And I think about people like you, Mayor Regina Romero in Tucson, Arizona, the only Latina mayor of a major American city, the Arizona Democratic Party chairwoman now, and State Senator Raquel Chaurand, who's one of my personal favorites. The Latinas who are really leading this movement that don't spend a lot of time on social media, don't spend a lot of time getting credit for what they're doing. They're out there, nose to the grindstone, doing the work. And, I feel good about the future of our country and our community because of people like Liz and Regina and Raquel and so many of other Latina Arizona leaders. So I wanted to end it by honoring your leadership, Liz, and the leadership of those ladies. And next time you come on, Liz, you're going to bring your comadres with you. And we're going to get Raquel and Regina on future episodes. Thank you all so much for joining Found Translation. Continue to support, follow the show on social media at FIT_talk show, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and subscribe to the podcast. And you can download a podcast. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful weekend.